Welcome back, and as I say, we are joined by two people on a panel. We have Fine Gael backbench TD Alice Glenn, and also we have Independent Senator Mary Robinson, and in our studio audience a number of eminent people. And I'm going to start with William Binchy, who was on our programme last night and got fairly short shrift because of the kind of night that was in it. William, what about the 10th Amendment as it is proposed by the government? Do you see legal pitfalls?
Yes, Pat, I see several legal pitfalls, but perhaps it would be wise if I just concentrated on two of them tonight. First, although the government says that this bill is about divorce after 5 years separation, in fact, if one examines the proposal that is going to go to the people, there is no mention whatsoever of separation, nor is there any requirement that in fact divorce should be limited to separation. All that is necessary is that the marriage should have failed for a period of 5 years. If the marriage is a failure for a period of 5 years, whether the couple have separated or not, the judge is in a position to grant a divorce. That's a very important point which has got completely overlooked.
You were saying that judges have the subjective power to say, well, the two of you were fighting like cats and dogs 5 years ago, it was obviously over then.
Well, no, I wouldn't say that. I would say that the judge has the power to grant a divorce after 5 years when the marriage has failed, but without any requirement that the parties should have separated. When I watched the television and listened to the news last night, the presentation of the government proposals, I was of the view that 5 years separation was required. In fact, if you actually look at what is going to the people to ask them to say yes or no on, the type of divorce that is proposed is divorce that doesn't even require 1 week's separation between the spouses. That's point number one. And if I can make point number two, which is, I think, an equally serious blunder.
May I just clarify something with you, William? The Taoiseach seemed to make it clear to all of the journalists present at the press conference that that's what they had in mind. Right. Are you saying that as it's written in the amendment, that's not what it says? Absolutely,
and anybody who reads the amendment will see that.
Okay, point two.
Point number two is that at the moment the Constitution in Articles 41 and 42 gives substantial protection to families in their relationships with each other, between the parents and the children, and in rearing the children. The effect of this proposal will be to remove the constitutional protection towards the family in the rearing of the children and the education of the children. Remove that entirely once the couple are divorced. That's a very serious change, which again has not been mentioned, and it's quite possible has been overlooked by the government.
All right, you are author of a book, The Case Against Divorce. The author of a book, The Case for the Irish Republic, is William Duncan. He's also in the back row of our studio audience. William, what about those 2 points on the 10th Amendment? How do you read them?
Well, the amendment is going to introduce what must be one of the most restrictive forms of divorce in not just Europe, but the world. And not only is it going to do that, but it's going to entrench the restrictions within the Constitution. And one of the problems that I have with the proposal is to ask whether, in fact, it will take account of all cases where divorce is needed and deserved. Not, in other words, whether it goes too far, but whether it goes far enough at all.
What sort of cases have you in mind which would not be catered for in this proposal?
Well, I'm thinking, for example, of a case where let's say a 35-year-old wife is deserted and her husband sets up home with another man. Is it right that she should have to wait 5 years before being free to remarry in that kind of situation? The other kind of problem that I would have and concern that I would have would be the fact that two legal procedures will be involved, and there is, I think, a considerable problem of expense here. We have at the moment a somewhat inadequate civil legal aid system. And
are you suggesting that this simply won't work without a beefed up civil legal aid system?
I think it will work, but I would like the government to consider very seriously, along with these reforms, reforms particularly in the means test that now applies to the civil legal aid scheme.
We asked a question last night at the press conference that this could be read as divorce for the rich but not for the poor. Is that in effect what you're saying?
No, I think not. I think that people will be able to afford it, but the thing is, one doesn't want to put people who are already going through a financially very difficult time, as the breakdown of marriage is, through over a further financial hoop. And one wants to see that one doesn't have a system under which the divorce is available either for the very rich or for the very poor. I don't think that that will be the case, but I think we need to watch the legal aid system in parallel to this.
Right. If I may move down to the front row to Dr. Walton Empey of Meath and Kildare. I talked to Dr. Samuel Points today and got one man's view as chairman of the Role of the Church Committee that was on radio, but I'd like your view on the proposal as made by the government last night, Dr. Empey.
Well, of course, we haven't, again, had a chance to meet and discuss it, so again, it is a one-man view, really. But broadly speaking, what the government has proposed has been roughly in line with some of our suggestions. We found this thing very difficult to come to agreement upon because as a church we're probably the strictest of all about marriage in this country. We do not remarry divorced persons. We accept a very the legal aspects for nullity, but not the extended ones that we see in the Roman Catholic Church. So we are pretty restrictive when it comes to marriage. Therefore, teaching the lifelong nature of marriage, we found it difficult to come down on the side of divorce. But having looked at the options, we came down to the idea that marriage is breaking down. There is no doubt about that, and increasingly so. Therefore, that problem has to be met. And we thought that there were only two possible answers to it. One was an extension of the nullity laws, and we have grave doubts about that. We feel that some of the areas where nullity might be granted, such as psychological defect at the time of the marriage, is very difficult to assess 20 years into a marriage. Also, it's important that people know very clearly whether they're married or not. And if there are these sort of question marks over it, it makes life difficult and damages the institution of marriage. Eventually, we came down to decide that divorce was the only way to meet what is a fact. We don't like that fact that marriage is breaking down so readily across the country and throughout Western Europe, but it is a fact, and we feel that divorce is a response to that fact, not a cause.
Right,
of
so
marital
you went
breakdown.
for what you would call the balance of compassion in saying yes to divorce.
Yes.
What about the specific measure as proposed by the government last night? Do you think it's too restrictive, or is it just right for you?
No, because one of our church groups actually mentioned 5-year separation, and I think that's broadly in keeping with what we have said and what we said to the Joint Commission of the Oireachtas and Marital Breakdown.
Right, I'll move on to Bernadette Bonar, who's sitting beside Dr. Empey. You've heard what the Bishop said from the Church of Ireland point of view. What is your view, the balance of compassion or otherwise?
Well, could I just comment on what the gentleman from the Southern Health Board said there a while ago?
Tom Ryan, yes.
I am on the Eastern Health Board, and we have no problem as on the scale that he is talking about. That's rather strange. Now, marital breakdown is on the increase, there's no doubt about that. But I think we should get it into perspective. We have heard the figures of 70,000. We have certain TDs saying it's maybe 100,000 or 150,000. It's extraordinary that the Joint Committee on Marital Breakdown could only find something like 21,000 people, meaning half that in couples. So I think we should get the scale of the problem into perspective. I am totally against divorce, and for the reason that its women and children suffer. No matter what country you examine the issue and study it, you'll find it is women and children are suffering.
Even in Britain, where, for example, more women file for divorce than men?
No, what I mean is in Britain, 60% of women who are divorced go straight on to social welfare, and 1/3 of fathers never again see their children. Now, 88% of women living alone in Britain are women. 88% of lone parents are women, and 63% of that 88% are there through divorce. Now, it is true that the majority are women who look for divorce in England, but the hidden factor there is that already the men have gone off and deserted them, and this is the only legal system available to them to try and get their alimony.
What do you say to many women living perhaps in the west of Ireland who've been deserted by their menfolk many years ago, who emigrated to earn a living to send it back to the west of Ireland, but stopped doing so after they'd met another woman in Britain? And many women, and you probably know of them, who've been abandoned for years. What solution do you propose for them?
Well, I suppose to some human problems there are no solutions, and I would have to know a particular case, but I do personally know many cases, and some of them are good friends of mine, where the husband has gone off and left his wife and little children, and I have seen the hurt faces of those children making First Communion, confirmation, going to school, when the fathers are around for the other children. Yeah. Now, don't tell me that divorce is going to solve that problem. If anything, it will take all status from the woman. She feels she has a husband, even though he's not living with her. But if divorce comes in, what's going to happen? His position is going to be made legal and respectable, and she will be left with no hope of any sort. In fact, in that situation, the law is on the side of the offender.
Bernadette, you presumably hope and believe that this referendum will be defeated.
I have no doubt it will be defeated.
If it were to get through, what do you think of it as a sort of a minimum step, or do you think it's a very maximum step?
Oh, it is the most liberal form of divorce we could possibly have. It took England nearly 100 years to arrive at that type of divorce. It will be catastrophic for this country. But let me say, I have the greatest faith in the common sense and judgment of the Irish people. And I have no doubt when they hear the facts, and let me repeat, when they hear the facts, and I hope they get them properly from both sides, that the people will make up their minds and they will reject this referendum.
All right, let's go to